is Diana Buttu, who is a Palestinian lawyer and analyst who served as a legal advisor to the Palestinian negotiating team from 2000 to 2005. And this is where Diana is going to bring us to what should happen now. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kamel, and thank you to all the organizers. Also, thank you for such a wonderful panel. You've made it so much easier for me to speak with having so many wonderful experts and analysts and activists and people who I very deeply admire being on this panel. I want to raise a few issues and talk about not only where we should go from here, but why it is that we should be going the way that I think that we should be going. The first is that I think it's important to keep in mind why there has been so much international attention on this issue of annexation. I'm going to raise three issues. The first two I'll raise at the beginning, and then the third I'll raise a little bit later. The first reason is because annexation, in the minds of many people in the international community, deals the final blow to this sacred cow of the two-state solution. Annexation also deals a fatal blow to another sacred cow, and that is the issue of the peace process. And so it's for these two reasons that we've seen that there's been a lot of international attention that's been brought to bear on this issue of annexation. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, why is it that annexation is happening now? Now, a few of my co-panelists have mentioned this. They've mentioned the issue of corruption trials. They've mentioned the right-wing coalition, etc. And I just want to add to that by saying that the reason that this is happening now is because it can. For such a long time, we've seen, and we all know this, that for over 50 years, for 53 years, we've seen this creeping annexation take place throughout the West Bank. We've seen over time the construction of Israeli-only settlements. We've seen the construction of Israeli-only roads. We're now at a situation where there's close to 700,000 Israeli settlers living in the West Bank. That's about 25% of the population. And when you get to this place where you see this happening over time, it begs the question, why is it that Netanyahu is doing it now? And the reason, as I said, is because he can. This is a man who, unlike in previous Israeli prime ministers, there's always been, every government has always taken the position that they can and should steal Palestinian land. But they've always done so very quietly, without raising the ire of the international community, a little condemnation here, a little not so nice word there, but they've continued with their project. Along comes Netanyahu, and Netanyahu's position has long been that we need to be proud about this and we need to be bold about this, and we don't need to shy away from this. His point is that he wants to deal a final blow to anything that's called international legality, international law, and instead really put the coffin in the nail of this international system. And so he did this first in 2018 when, as Dr. Youssef was mentioning, with the declaration of the Jewish nation state law, the passage of the Jewish nation state law. Again, it wasn't something that needed to happen. They already had everything in place that was making sure that Israel was already favoring the idea of a Jewish state over that of a democracy. It was all in place. There was no need to do it. But again, being the person that he is, wanting to be loud and bold, he proceeded ahead with it in the face of international condemnation. And so here we are now too, where he wants to proceed ahead in the face of international condemnation, because he wants to make a point to the international community that it doesn't matter what they say, it matters what he does. And so the question is why, if we know that this has been going on for 53 years, why is it that we should be resisting this annexation? Why not embrace it, as some people have said? And the reason is that it causes untold harm. It's the equivalent of saying, let's embrace another 4 years of Trump, because eventually there will be a Democratic president who will be much further to the left than Biden or than any other person that we have in place now. And the people who, that may be true, but the people that it's going to cause harm to are not the ones who are going to be standing up and saying, yes, let's vote in Trump again. Now, what's going to happen on the ground with annexation is we are going to see more and more settlement housing being built and constructed. We are going to see settler violence, more and more of it. We've already been seeing over the course of the past 2 weeks a sharp increase in settler violence, particularly in places like Buttu in the West Bank and in places near the Jordan Valley as well. We have already seen that there are more checkpoints that are going up. We've seen so many home demolitions at a time when people are told to be sheltering in place. Israel has taken upon itself to actually demolish Palestinian homes, particularly in those areas that it's talking about annexing. And of course, we are going to see increased land confiscation. We have no idea what's going to happen to Palestinians who are living in those areas that are going to be annexed, because Israel has already said that they're not going to make the same quote unquote mistake that was made when it came to the annexation of Jerusalem, and certainly not when it came to the Golan Heights. In other words, Palestinians will not be permanent residents. They're certainly not going to be citizens. It's not clear what they will be. My fear is that it's going to be a type of residency that will be imposed upon them along the same lines as the right wing wants, which is if you are not loyal to the state of Israel, you can be kicked out. If you in any way resist, you can be kicked out. Don't be surprised by any of this. And so the question is how? How should we be resisting? I think it's very important to keep in mind a few things. The first is that one of the reasons, I mentioned the two reasons that the international community has been involved, the third reason that the international community has been involved is because there have been so many activists who've been working tirelessly. We're now coming up on the 15th anniversary of the BDS movement in a few days, who've been pushing for BDS for quite some time. And throughout that 15-year struggle, it certainly felt as though there have been a lot of downs, some ups, and people always question whether it's effective or not effective. I'm always given long lectures by non-BDS supporters about how ineffective it is. And yet here we see that it is a tactic that's paying off. This is now a time where the international community is listening and is contemplating sanctions, the first time in history. Now, it's sad that it's taken the death of the two-state solution, the killing off of that sacred cow of the two-state solution, or killing off the sacred cow of the peace process to bring it to this point. But now that we have this door that has been open, we need to keep pushing it further and much wider open than it has been in the past. It's also important to keep in mind that the Palestinian Authority has been loath throughout its existence, and certainly over the course of the past 15 years, to adopt any BDS strategy. In fact, it's always been quite the opposite, that as BDS was pushing one way, that you often saw that the PA was pushing another way. And yet here we have, for the first time, that the PA has in fact endorsed sanctions and has been calling for sanctions. Now, we cannot let them stop there. At the same time that they've been pushing and calling for sanctions, they've also indicated that they are cutting off security, collaboration, all forms of connection with Israel. It's really a question of time before that resumes, because in the absence of an alternative strategy that completely breaks the dependency from Israel, unfortunately, there will be a return to this. Why? Because so much of Palestinian life has been wrapped up into security coordination collaboration. For example, if you are a person who's a merchant, you want to bring in tiles from Turkey, you need to have a security permit to be able to do so. If you want to get treated in a hospital, there are often times where you need to get a security permit to be able to do so. So the even matters that are civilian in nature have been so wrapped up in the security apparatus that absent a different strategy, there will be a resumption of this type of collaboration. And that's what I am afraid of. We must continue to push ahead with BDS, making sure that we are doing what we can do within our own countries to hold Israel accountable. And again, that door has been kicked open. And we have to also make sure that the Palestinian Authority continues to be held accountable to this as well. There are, of course, we have to think beyond the paradigm of Oslo, and this is something that we've been talking about for many, many, many years, about how we've been completely trapped into this Oslo framework. The good thing, if there is a good thing about any of this, is that this is now forcing people to break out of that Oslo framework, and now we have to really seriously be considering a completely different discourse. One that is not necessarily one person, one vote, although it's something that I believe in one state, but I do believe that there has to be an accountability component to it as well. I refuse to accept that the settlers have won. They have absolutely no right to be there, and I will resist until my last breath to make sure that they do not get that ability to stay there. I refuse to be somebody who continues to believe that might equals right, and we have to do so as well. I want to end with a final word by talking about the resilience that we've seen here in Palestine, the resilience that Palestinians continue to exhibit in the face of this annexation. I think that it's silly for the world to be requesting or demanding that somehow there be massive protests in order for Palestinians to express that things are wrong or to show their displeasure. We don't need to protest Israel's ethnic cleansing of us. I think it's up to the world to be protesting Israel's attempt to steal and to ethnically cleanse. What we have seen instead is this hardcore resilience, even in the face of Israeli attempts now to punish Palestinians for the Palestinian Authority decision to cut off security collaboration, that we continue to see people who are resisting these measures of annexation, whether it's by going through the checkpoints, continuing to try to farm land even when land has been stolen, continuing to try to build houses even when houses get demolished. This Palestinian resilience and resistance has continued even in the face of this. We're not putting our heads down in the sand. We're not giving up and saying our dreams are over. It's quite the opposite. The ball is now in the court of the international community, and this is where they have to now express definitively whether they believe in a system of legal order or whether they don't. And if they don't, then we will act accordingly, and we'll move on accordingly. I'm going to stop there, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Diana. That was